When I helped my brother with his medical bills, my spoiled sister demanded that I buy her a house. When I refused, my mother threatened to cut off all communication and attempted to give her control over the family business. I am 36 years old and have two siblings, Damon, 34, and Nancy, 28. To put it simply, Nancy was and always has been the golden child, especially in my mother's eyes. My father had some common sense. He would occasionally tell Nancy to stop, but even he gave her a lot more leeway than he ever gave Damon or me. It's difficult to explain exactly how it happened, but it was everywhere. More attention, bigger presence, constant praise, simply more of everything positive. And if she misbehaved, Mom would laugh it off like it was the cutest thing in the world. Her parents lovingly called her a surprise because she came along much later than Damon and me. I genuinely believe that the age gap played a significant role in the preferential treatment from the moment she was able to walk and talk. The most damaging part was Mom's obvious refusal to acknowledge the favoritism. If Nancy said something, cruel, and believe me, she had a talent for it. Mom would disregard our hurt feelings by saying we were too sensitive or that Nancy was only joking, but it was never a joke, as you could see in Nancy's eyes and the slight satisfied smirk she'd wear. It's a uniquely painful experience that erodes your self-worth and makes you feel inadequate all the time, as if you're always in second or, in my case, third. It seemed like our family was split into two teams, Mom and Nancy against the world, and Dad, Damon, and I were always on the defensive. Even Dad wasn't a trustworthy teammate. He frequently switched sides, apparently to keep the peace. I remember that when I was around 12, I got a new dress that I was excited about, and Nancy took one look at me and said, "It makes you look even wider than usual." Mom just laughed and said, "Oh, Nancy, don't be silly." But I felt my face burn with shame. She had a talent for identifying your weaknesses and taking advantage of them. The Thanksgiving incident with Damon is a prime example. He was excitedly discussing his literature major, his love of books, and his passion for writing when Nancy, without missing a beat, called him an unemployed burden in front of the entire extended family. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad muttered, "Did Nancy do it?" It was a constant barrage of negativity directed at everything and everything, including my appearance, Damon's career aspirations, our life choices, and everything. I was venting to Nancy about how exhausted I was after a particularly demanding work week, and she took advantage of the fact that I was so tired that she launched into a tirade about how I looked completely haggard and that my long hours meant I'd never find a boyfriend. I remember the exact words because they stung so badly. After all, honestly, no guy wants a workaholic hag who looks like she's aged 10 years in the past 2 years. I went completely silent for weeks after that. I couldn't bring myself to speak to her. It wasn't just us. She would treat friends, family, and strangers with the same casual contempt. Damon and I naturally became deeply resentful of Nancy for her cruelty, but we were even more resentful of Mom for allowing it. I recall one particularly heated argument with Damon in which I said, "We hated her for that," referring to Mom's unwavering support of Nye's behavior. I know it sounds harsh, but that's the unadulterated reality of how we felt. It's easier to brush off insults from someone you consider to be your equal, or even someone you consider to be less attractive. But when someone who is widely regarded as beautiful tells you that you're not, it carries more weight and plants doubt in your mind. I began to doubt my appearance and worth, and I believe that looking back with the benefit of hindsight and therapy, Nancy's constant need to put others down is what made it difficult to deal with. Stemmed from her deep-seated insecurities, she didn't have a traditional career path. She dabbled in freelance graphic design, but it was more of a hobby than a profession. She was financially and emotionally dependent on our parents. Perhaps she used disparaging others as a way to make up for her own perceived shortcomings. Up until we were 25, Damon and I tried to ignore her remarks, but everything changed drastically 8 years ago when our father passed away. Despite his role in the situation, he was in many ways the glue that kept our broken family together. Damon and I started to drift away from Mom and Nancy after he passed away. It started subtly with fewer phone calls and fewer visits, though we'd still see them at major family gatherings, the occasional holiday, and maybe Christmas, but only some years if we felt like it. He wasn't perfect. He indulged in Nye's behavior more than he should have, but he was the one who occasionally tried to mediate to keep things somewhat normal after his death had broken that fragile relationship. It became a conscious decision, and we actively began to avoid them. As I've come to put it, a wall was established between us and them, and to be honest, I liked the wall because it served as a much-needed buffer, allowing us to avoid seeing Dad's angry outbursts and initially, After Dad's illness and eventual death, we made sincere attempts to stay in touch. I suppose we felt obligated to them, but those attempts were extremely strained. Every phone call and visit felt forced and awkward, and inevitably during those limited one particularly awkward Christmas dinner, Mom spent the entire evening praising Nee's artistic talent and showing off some truly awful designs Nancy had supposedly created for a major client who turned out to be a distant cousin. She entirely ignored Damon's recent promotion and my successful completion of a major project, but she would also make some glowing remarks about Nye's non-existent accomplishments, or subtly criticize our choices, reminding us why we were pulling away in the first place. It served as a clear reminder of the dynamic we were attempting to avoid at work. So eventually, Damon and I began to make more and more elaborate excuses. We were overburdened with work, had prior commitments, and were coming down with something to avoid spending time with them. We realized that the emotional toll of those interactions far outweighed any perceived familial obligation. There was a tacit understanding between Damon and me that distance was the best solution. Not that I didn't feel like visiting after Dad passed away. Rather, we made the conscious decision to avoid doing so to protect our own mental and emotional health, not to disrespect his memory. More importantly, Mom and Nancy didn't make any real attempts to stay in touch or call us all the time, begging us to come visit. Rather, it was an unspoken agreement to drift apart. We were all financially secure, so there was no practical need for frequent interaction. It was just easier to live in separate orbits. The silence was a few years ago. Damon had a nasty accident and broke his ankle. He was working between jobs at the time, putting all of his energy and resources into starting an online magazine. Since money was tight and his medical bills were mounting, I offered to help him with the costs. He initially declined because he is a fiercely independent person, but I persisted because I didn't want him to spend all of his savings just before the launch of his magazine. I paid for all of his medication, the extensive physiotherapy he required, and even the cost of it was obvious to me that I should hire a full-time nurse to help him recover. It wasn't about the money, it was about supporting my brother, whom I truly cared about and wanted to see succeed. It was an act of sibling love and support. However, it unintentionally created a dangerous precedent in Nancy's and my mother's minds. A few weeks later, I received a phone call from Nancy that left me stunned. It was so bold and completely strange that at first I thought she was kidding when she told me that she wanted to purchase a penthouse apartment. She explained this ridiculous request by saying that she was embarrassed to still be living with her mother at the age of 28, and that since I had helped Damon, it was only fair that I help her too. She conveniently forgot to mention that she only had enough money to cover half the cost of this luxury apartment. My initial reaction was a mixture of disbelief and simmering anger, and when we did speak, it was usually interspersed with my insults and negativity. Now, out of the blue, I tried to understand her career, or lack thereof, and found it astounding that she called herself a freelance graphic designer, but it was more of a casual hobby than a legitimate profession. She had no formal training, no degree, and no real portfolio to speak of, and she had been busy criticizing my life choices, questioning my career, and making snide remarks about my appearance the last time we interacted. She was demanding a giant sum of money, which was surreal. It wasn't a career that could support the purchase of a penthouse, so I gave her a firm no. I told her straight out that I wasn't going to finance her extravagant lifestyle, and I suggested, perhaps a little too bluntly, that she consider getting a real job if she wanted to afford such luxuries. I know it wasn't the most diplomatic response, but I was truly shocked by her entitlement. Years ago, and they had even been used, she pretended to have a list of exclusive clients, but they were mostly family friends who were coerced by Mom's constant pressure. The fact that Damon's situation was a real emergency while hers was a self-inflicted desire for luxury is something I tried to keep calm about, but my patience was wearing thin. I repeated my refusal, emphasizing that I was not a bank and that I was not responsible for funding her unrealistic aspirations. She, predictably, did not take my refusal well and launched into a furious tirade, accusing me of favoritism towards Damon. She yelled that I had readily assisted him with his medical expenses and that it was my duty as the oldest sibling to support her. I was so irritated by her entitlement and her total lack of self-awareness that it seemed like she thought she was entitled to this penthouse just because she was my sister. The argument turned into a full-fledged argument, and Nanny's voice reached a near hysterical pitch. I finally said, "No one last time," and hung up the phone because I couldn't stand to hear her yelling any longer. She kept calling back, but I ignored each call I made because it was obvious that our relationship, or at least the appearance of one, was over. The drama didn't end with Nee's outburst. My mother called me next, and the conversation was even. more infuriating. She began with a whiny, passive-aggressive tone, complaining about how unfair I was to Nancy and accusing me of blatantly playing favorites, and then she dropped a crucial hint. Our relationship was purely transactional for her. She only contacted me when she wanted something, showing no consideration for my feelings or the years of strange silence between us. I had purposefully chosen a career path outside the family business because I would rather not be involved. Neither did Damon, and frankly, neither did Nancy, until it suited her to pretend otherwise after Dad passed away. Nancy had approached our uncle, Dad's brother, who had taken over the family business, before coming to me. He had wisely rejected her request, revealing the depth of their desperation. The fact that I was their second choice only made me more enraged. Then Mom admitted that their financial situation was somewhat precarious, largely because of Nye's extravagant spending habits. She said that giving Nancy the money for the penthouse would make things easier for her in the future, effectively, admitting that she wanted me to subsidize Nye's lifestyle so she wouldn't have to. She then used the classic guilt trip tactic, threatening to cut off contact if I didn't comply with their demands, which was, to be honest, embarrassing. I calmly pointed out this hypocrisy, telling her that it wasn't my problem, and that Nancy could either find a job or stay with me until she was 35 for all I cared. My anger, which had been building for years, finally erupted, and I let loose a torrent of pent-up frustration. I told her that she had no right to accuse me of playing favorites, when she had been doing just that for my entire life. I also reminded her that Damon and I had made peace with her obvious favoritism years ago, admitting the fact that our family dynamic was dysfunctional. I told them straight out that I didn't know them at all and that I had my life, my responsibilities, and my priorities. She retaliated by accusing me of being disrespectful and ungrateful, and she screamed that she never wanted to speak to me again. I laughed because, really, what difference would that make? I brought up my impending wedding, emphasizing that I didn't need her presence in my life, and I hung up the phone, blocking her and Nancy on all platforms possible. I should probably clarify a key point I neglected to mention earlier. I'm engaged to Andrew, a wonderful, supportive man of 37. We've been together for almost 5 years, and he's been incredibly understanding of the complexities of my family situation. Initially, I had thought about inviting Mom and Nancy to the wedding out of obligation and a desire to keep some semblance of family harmony, but after that explosive phone call, that thought completely disappeared. However, in the aftermath, although I knew I was right, I felt a little guilty because of the strange, irrational feeling that comes from societal conditioning that tells you family is everything, no matter how toxic the relationship may be. Additionally, Andrew initially struggled to understand the situation fully because he comes from a very different background. The confrontation wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. Mom, unable to contact me directly, messaged Andrew on social media and poured out her highly biased version of events, expressing her profound disappointment in me by declaring that she was permanently cutting me off. Close-knit, loving, and supportive family, so the idea of a mother and sister acting so maliciously was completely alien to him. At first, he felt some sympathy for Mom and Nancy, seeing them as the parties who were wronged, but he was unable to fully understand the extent of the dysfunction, which caused a brief but significant strain between us. I found myself having to defend my actions by once again outlining the situation's history. So, Reddit AITA, I honestly don't think I am, but I'm open to hearing your opinions. And if you've read this lengthy, thankfully, the online support I received from strangers on Reddit who had read this saga earlier was incredibly validating. Their comments and shared experiences were incredibly validating. Their unwavering support helped to quell those nagging doubts and reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my feelings were valid, and that I had every right to protect myself from toxic people, even if those people were family. As always, Damon reinforced everything the online commenters were saying, reminding me of countless instances of Mom and my manipulative behavior. The most significant turning point, however, was when Damon sat down with Andrew and explained the situation from his perspective. He gave specific examples, detailed the history of the family dynamic, and painted a clear picture of the emotional toll it had taken on both of us. He validated my feelings by telling me that I wasn't being unreasonable and that I wasn't overreacting. He also understood the behavior of their cons, which was consistent negativity and a complete lack of empathy. Andrew's perspective changed almost immediately after he witnessed the dysfunction firsthand. He finally realized that the situation was a toxic and unhealthy family dynamic that I needed to leave, and he apologized for his initial skepticism, acknowledging that his own happy family experiences had prevented him from seeing the truth of my predicament. He even said that his parents would never act in such a manner. He became my ardent supporter, fully supporting my decision to cut off contact with Mom and Nancy, so we took action and blocked them. My uncle's dad's brother, who had taken over the family business, contacted Damon and me with a time-sensitive matter. He sounded distressed, almost frantic, and told us that Mom was planning to transfer a significant portion of her shares in the company to Nancy. She intended to give Nancy voting shares, giving her significant control over the business. His reaction was immediate, and he thought it was a terrible turn of events. Damon, Andrew, and I were all on every platform. Update 2. Nancy was completely incompetent when it came to business matters. She had no experience, no understanding, and no interest in anything apart from her shallow desires. He explained that giving her voting power in the company was, in his opinion, a disastrous mistake that could potentially jeopardize the entire enterprise. Although Mom technically had voting power, she had always deferred to his judgment and had never meddled in the day-to-day operations of the company, trusting him to make sound decisions. Damon and I were immediately concerned because we knew the company's success was crucial, not only for our uncle, but also for the livelihoods of many employees. He was extremely concerned that this would change if Nancy took control, envisioning endless arguments, power struggles, and potentially disastrous decisions driven by Nye's whims and Mom's blind favoritism. He explicitly stated that he did not want to have to engage in constant battles with them over every aspect of the business. Despite our tense relationship and the recent explosive confrontation, we felt a special responsibility to our uncle, who had been incredibly supportive and kind to us after Dad's death. As I mentioned before, he had looked out for us, and we couldn't in good conscience leave him to deal with this. We reluctantly concluded that we couldn't just stand by and watch this happen. We felt a moral obligation to intervene to try to prevent what we saw as an impending disaster. Update 3. We prepared ourselves and went to see Mom, fully aware that Nancy would be there and that her presence would make the conversation infinitely more difficult. We knew it wouldn't be pleasant, but we felt it was necessary. As expected, Nancy was there, perched beside Mom like a venomous bird. We immediately launched into the issue, expressing our strong opposition to the plan to give Nancy voting shares because we were worried about the future of the business and felt a sense of duty to protect it, even if it meant facing Mom and Nancy again. Nancy, predictably, yelled about how we were jealous of her, how we had never taken the chance to be involved in the family business ourselves, and how we were acting as if we owned the place. My mother, who at first adopted a strategy of stony silence, refused to acknowledge our presence or our concerns and simply ignored us as if we weren't even in the room. Her voice reached a fever pitch and her face. It was a very unpleasant and stressful scene, and I made a valiant effort to talk sense into Mom's head, appealing to her sense of responsibility and logic. I kept reminding her that Dad had made it clear time and time again that he didn't want any of his children involved in the day-to-day operations of the company because he had implicitly trusted his brother, our uncle, and he had wanted to avoid any potential family arguments or legal disputes. I also clarified that I had purposefully chosen a different career path because of Dad's wishes, out of respect for his vision, essentially begged her to change her mind and consider the possible harm she might be causing to the company, our uncle, and everyone else who relied on it for their livelihood. Despite my attempts at reasoned conversation, Nancy persisted in her TI tirade, accusing us of being jealous, resentful, and interfering. She even threatened to call the police on us, acting as though we were intruders in our mother's house. It was a genuinely insane display of entitlement and rage. I believe that at her core, Nancy was afraid because she knew deep down that her financial security and entire way of life depended on Mom's continued control of the business, and the thought of losing that security and having to fend for herself filled her with panic. I also think that during Nancy's outburst, my mother remained silent to make me feel bad as if I were attacking her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Mom silenced everyone and told us in a cold, dismissive tone that we had been extremely disrespectful and insulting, ordered us to leave, saying she would consider what we had said and let our uncle know about her decision. Nancy, of course, stayed by her side, but Damon and I left. We had done our best, and we had made a strong and clear case, appealing to Mom's loyalty to Dad's wishes, her sense of reason, and her concern for the company's future. We honestly didn't know if it had made a difference, but we hoped she would change her mind, but we were ready for the worst. I spoke with Andrew about what had happened, and I told him that even if it did not work out, at least we tried. After 2 excruciating weeks, our uncle called us again with good news. He told us that, after much consideration, Mom had decided not to give Nancy voting rights in the company. Instead, she was going to give Nancy preferred shares, which would give her a steady income stream, but no control over how the business was run. This was a giant relief because, at least for the foreseeable future, the company was safe from any potential mismanagement by NY, and our uncle could continue to run it efficiently without constantly worrying about interference. I should clarify, something to address any potential questions or assumptions that some people may have had after reading earlier that Dad had left us and his other children with nothing. And most importantly, for me and Damon, we continued to have no contact with Mom and Nancy, which was the ultimate victory. The entire situation had been extremely stressful. It was strange having to intervene in a matter that technically wasn't our direct concern, but we felt morally obligated to act to protect our uncle, to honor our father's wishes and safeguard the company's future. It's just not true. He did leave us assets that were separate and distinct from the company shares. I hadn't brought up those assets earlier because I didn't think they were directly related to the main conflict, which was about NY's entitlement and Mom's enabling behavior. However, to be clear, we did inherit other things. Dad wasn't entirely unaware of NY's shortcomings. He wasn't, as I previously stated, in the same situation as my mother. He simply had a soft spot for her and a propensity to indulge her more than he ought to have. I would rather not focus on the negative. I want to remember him with fondness because of his personality. The important thing is that we didn't rely on Mom or Nancy for financial support. Instead, we had our resources, careers, and lives. Update 5. So, months later, the no contact order is still in place, and everything has been blissfully peaceful. My wedding is just a week away, and the invitations have long since been sent out, and naturally, Mom and Nancy weren't on the AITA guest list. Our relatives, with whom we do stay in touch, have kept us updated on the fallout, and it appears that Mom and Nancy are, it's pathetic, predictable, and completely unsurprising. It's a classic example of their manipulative attention-seeking behavior. They found out about the wedding from our uncle, who was invited, and have been actively trying to ruin it by contacting other family members and trying to dissuade them from going, spreading lies and distortions about me, and portraying themselves as the innocent victims. They can't stand the idea that I'll be happy moving on with my life without them. The relationship I've developed with Andrew is the total. I am happy, successful, and about to marry the love of my life, Damon. He is loving, kind, supportive, and honest, which is the opposite of what I grew up with. He taught me that family should not be conditional. I remember the cruel, cutting insults Nancy used to throw at me about how I would become a lonely, jobless workaholic. Well, the jokes are on her.